The curtain never rises, why meaning may never arrive, and yet we keep standing on stage. Beckett doesn't offer answers. He doesn't even offer questions in the usual sense. What he offers is a mirror. And it's not the kind of mirror that flatters. It's the kind that shows you everything, the emptiness of routine, the lack of structure behind your habits, the futility of most of your plans. If you've ever found yourself staring at a wall in silence, unsure whether you're bored or broken, then you've already tasted a fragment of what Beckett saw in full. Life, for Beckett, is not a puzzle to be solved. It's more like a looping tape, where the same gestures repeat, the same words echo, and the same hopes rise and collapse, again and again. His characters don't struggle for meaning, they struggle with the absence of it. And that's a much heavier burden.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
In Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon wait endlessly for someone named Godot, who never comes. That's the whole plot, two men waiting. And yet everything is there. The anxiety, the doubt, the collapse of faith, the rituals we invent to pass time, the repetition we cling to like a lifeline just to get through the day. What's crushing is not that Godot doesn't arrive. What's crushing is that they keep showing up anyway. Now think about your own life. How many things do you keep doing without any real belief in their payoff? How many routines do you maintain just because you're afraid of what happens if you stop? The truth is, we all build little gods into our lives, not divine beings, but projected hopes, promotions, relationships, recognition, clarity, peace. We wait for these things as if they will finally explain everything. But often, they don't come. Or worse, they come and still leave us hollow. Beckett isn't trying to depress you. He's trying to expose the architecture of our condition. He's stripping away the illusions that keep us moving, not to discourage movement, but to ask what movement means when there is no destination. This is where the absurd lives, not in chaos, but in the collision between our hunger for meaning and a reality that remains silent. We're driven by a thirst that the world doesn't seem designed to quench. And yet, we continue. Here's what's interesting. Beckett doesn't admire rebellion. He doesn't praise resistance. What he shows us instead is persistence stripped of purpose. His characters don't resist the absurd, they embody it. They stay, they wait, they talk, they fall, they get back up. Not because it leads anywhere, but because that's what it means to exist. We like to think meaning is something we find. But Beckett shows us something harsher. Meaning might never be found and we still have to live. This raises a brutal question. If nothing ever gives your life meaning, would you still live it? Most people can't face that question. They drown it in distractions, narratives, plans. But Beckett puts you face to face with it. And he doesn't flinch. That's why his work feels empty to some. But they mistake silence for absence. Beckett's silence is full of the weight we carry, full of the things we refuse to say out loud, full of the realization that the world might not care about our struggles, and yet our struggles continue anyway. Think about what that means. If you can persist without purpose, if you can move without a map, then maybe you're stronger than you think. Not because you've figured it out, but because you've kept going even when nothing is figured out. There's honor in that. Not the kind of honor that gets celebrated, but the kind that keeps you upright when everything else falls apart. We live in a culture obsessed with meaning. We want everything to add up. We want stories with arcs, lives with closure, struggles with resolution. But Beckett drops us into a world where the story doesn't progress, the arc is a flat line, and the resolution never arrives. And in that world, he asks, what now? What do you do when the script never changes? When the applause never comes? When the God you're waiting for never shows up? You keep speaking. You keep showing up. Not because of hope, but because existence itself is the act. Because continuing might be the only true statement you can make. Beckett's characters say things like nothing to be done, and they're right. There is no grand finale, no savior, but no climax, but they still talk. They still interact. They still exist. That's the point. Now apply that to your life. When you feel like nothing's changing, when every day feels like a repeat of the last, when your goals seem distant or empty, what do? You keep going, not because it leads somewhere, but because continuing is what you do. It's what we all do, whether we admit it or not. This is the core of Beckett's insight. He doesn't romanticize the absurd. He just refuses to look away from it. And in that refusal, there's a strange kind of dignity. We often think of meaning as something grand. But Beckett suggests that maybe meaning is the wrong lens altogether. Maybe presence is all that's left. Maybe being here, fully here, without expecting anything to justify it, is the most honest way to live. So where does that leave us? With a strange kind of freedom. If life doesn't owe us meaning, then nothing is stopping us from creating our own structure. Not because it's true, but because it's ours. If the world won't give you purpose, you can still give yourself rhythm. If nothing is coming to save you, you can still stand up and speak. And if the curtain never rises, maybe the stage was always yours. This isn't nihilism. It's clarity. It's the stripping away of delusion so that what remains, however bleak, is real. Beckett doesn't want you to despair. He wants you to see that despair is only one response. The other is to nod, lift your head, and continue. Because maybe the bravest thing you can do isn't to believe, but to persist without belief. That's what it means to be human. The weight of stillness, why doing nothing might reveal everything. Beckett's greatest achievement might not be his dialogue, his structure, or even his themes. It's his courage to stop the motion. In a world obsessed with progress, he makes us sit still. And in that stillness, something terrifying happens. We're left alone with ourselves. No distractions, no climaxes, no resolutions. Just the raw continuity of being. You feel it in waiting for Godot, the long pauses, the repetitive conversations, the sense that nothing is happening and yet everything is happening beneath the surface. But it's not a void, it's a mirror with the lights turned up too high. And what do we see when we stop rushing from one task to another? We see the quiet panic underneath our routines. We see how much of our identity is built on motion, and how lost we feel when we're forced to be still. Beckett forces us into that space, not to punish us, but to show us what we've been running from. We live in a culture that celebrates busyness. Productivity is a virtue. Inactivity is failure. If you're not moving, you're falling behind. But Beckett's characters don't move. Or if they do, it's in circles. They speak without saying anything new. They perform gestures that lead nowhere. And yet, they don't collapse. They don't disappear. They stay. They endure. They persist in the face of nothing. That's not weakness. That's power stripped of performance. There's a kind of spiritual muscle in stillness that we rarely recognize. But it's one thing to keep going when there's a finish line. It's another to keep going when there's no end in sight, no assurance that any of it matters. That's what Beckett shows us, the strength of continuing without reward. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Beckett suggests that our obsession with meaning might be a defense mechanism. We invent meaning to avoid facing the silence. We fill our days with noise, not because there's something to hear, but because we're terrified of what the silence might reveal. What if there's no grand purpose? What if there's no cosmic plan? What if, at the core, life just is unfolding without reason, without narrative, without destination? That's the abyss Beckett stares into. And he doesn't blink. He doesn't try to fill it. He just sits with it. That's why his work feels so radical. Not because it introduces new ideas, but because it refuses to escape the old ones. It forces us to sit with the absurdity rather than solve it. Now, think about your own life. What do you do when things go quiet? When the plans fall through, when the future feels uncertain, when the usual distractions lose their power, what's left? Can you be still without falling apart? Can you exist without being constantly validated by productivity or progress? Most of us can't. We panic. We reach for our phones, our to-do lists, our goals. We tell ourselves that if we can just keep moving, we won't have to face the void. But the void is always there. Beckett just points at it and says, "Look." Not to scare you, but to remind you that it's real and that it's survivable. One of the most profound aspects of Beckett's philosophy is his rejection of false hope. In Godot, the characters keep saying, "Let's go." But they never move. They remain stuck, not because they're weak, but because the structure of their world offers no way out. And isn't that what modern life often feels like? We say we're chasing our dreams, but we're trapped in cycles. We say we're building a future, but we're repeating the past. We say we're getting somewhere, but we don't know where. Beckett isn't mocking us, he's showing us the mechanics of our own minds. He's saying, look at what you're doing. Look at how you wait. Look at how you hope. Look at how you suffer under the weight of expectations that were never yours to begin with. But here's the twist. By doing nothing, Beckett reveals everything. When you strip away the illusion of progress, you're left with the truth of presence. When you stop performing for meaning, you begin to see your own agency. Not as a hero in a narrative, but as a being in time. Existing, breathing, witnessing. That's what his characters do. They witness each other. They exist together, even when nothing makes sense. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the hidden message behind all the silence. That presence itself, unadorned and unexplained, is the most radical form of being. There's a moment in Godot where one character says, "We always find something, add, to give us the impression we exist." And that line cuts deep, because it's not just about them. It's about us. What gives us the impression we exist? Our jobs, our relationships, our ambitions, our memories. But what happens when all of that falls away? Are we still real? Beckett doesn't answer. He just lets the silence hang there. And in that silence, a new kind of awareness emerges, one that doesn't depend on external validation. This is where Beckett intersects with a deeper kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't preach, doesn't promise, doesn't fix, the kind that simply stays. That says, yes, life is absurd. Yes, meaning may never come. Yes, the structure may be arbitrary. But here you are, breathing, aware, present, and maybe that's not nothing. Maybe that's everything. If you've ever sat in a quiet room and felt the weight of your own existence pressing down on you, you've already touched this space. It's not comfortable, but it's real. It's the space where illusions fall away, where you stop pretending that things will make sense if you just wait long enough, where you stop expecting rescue. And in that space you might find something stronger than hope, resilience. The kind of resilience that doesn't need a reason. The kind that simply stands up again and again without pretending to know why. But Beckett doesn't want you to give up. He wants you to see what you're really doing. He wants you to recognize the strength it takes to keep existing in a world that offers no guarantees. He wants you to stop lying to yourself about the grand narrative and start seeing the quiet dignity in your own persistence. That's why his characters don't leave the stage, because the stage is all there is. And maybe that's true for us too. So what does this mean for your life? It means that when you feel lost, you're not broken. When you feel like nothing makes sense, you're not failing. You're just facing the truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. It means that stillness is not weakness. It's a confrontation with the real. It means that your value doesn't come from motion or success or outcome. It comes from your ability to remain, to witness, to endure. That's not surrender. That's power at its most raw. And here's the final twist. The absurd isn't an enemy. It's a condition. It's the background noise of being human. And once you stop fighting it, you can start to hear something underneath. Not a solution, not a message, but a kind of rhythm, a heartbeat, a pulse that says, you are here, you exist. And that might be enough. Meaningless, but not empty, how the absurd can lead to honest living. When Beckett shows us a world without clear purpose, he's not dragging us into despair, he's forcing us to tear down the scaffolding of illusions we've built around ourselves. The absurd isn't a philosophical problem to solve, it's the description of a confrontation between our need for meaning and a universe that remains indifferent. But the absence of meaning doesn't mean the absence of value. That distinction is everything. Meaning is a structure we impose, value is something we can live. And Beckett's world, stripped of promise and plot, is still full of value, not in the form of triumph or success, but in the act of continuing itself. There's a brutal kind of beauty in watching characters who know they're stuck, who suspect they've been abandoned, and yet who still talk, still argue, still joke, still wait. That's not emptiness, that's honesty. It's what happens when all the distractions are peeled away and what's left is just two people enduring each other and themselves. In that endurance, something real starts to emerge, not a reason, but a presence. A kind of raw, unfiltered connection to the situation. And that connection is where Beckett's work becomes almost sacred. Not in a religious sense, but in the sense that it refuses to lie. We're trained to think that life must be justified, that we must have a goal, that we must be working towards something. But Beckett's philosophy suggests something more dangerous, that maybe life doesn't need justification. Maybe it just is. And maybe our task isn't to explain it, but to inhabit it as fully and as truthfully as we can. That's what makes the absurd not a trap, but a kind of liberation. Once you stop needing life to mean something, you can finally start living it without apology. This doesn't mean giving up. It means giving up false expectations. It means looking the silence in the face and choosing, consciously, to stay. It's not passive. It's active in the most profound sense. It's the decision to participate in a reality that offers no guarantees. And somehow, that choice becomes meaningful, not because meaning descends from the sky, but because you created it by staying. So now the question becomes, if life doesn't give you meaning, what kind of meaning will you give to life? And are you prepared for the possibility that the answer will not come from outside, but only from what you're willing to stand for when everything else falls away?